Leslie, it's great to be with you. I've so excited to sit down with you because I know that you are at Michelin and you are deeply involved with the Purpose program in the actual creation of it. So I was hoping today you might tell us, and since I learned about that, you all have actually won the #1 Best Place to Work by Forbes Magazine. I know you're super proud.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about your role and how you came to be in that role, and then we'll talk through some of the things about purpose.
Sure. It's kind of a crazy story if I go through the whole detail. But Michelin really believes that people should try different things, and that if you change up what you're doing in your career, you're going to stay more engaged and more motivated. And my background is marketing research. I'm a statistician in my background, and so I'd been doing that for, 25 years, partially at Michelin and partially at other companies. And really, after 13 years at Michelin, I said, I've researched enough about tires and the mobility industry. I want to do something different. And our CEO came to my office shortly after that, and he said, I have a project that I think you might like to work on. It wouldn't be that long, but it would break up what you're doing and give you something different to try. And he said, we've got this company purpose, and we worry that maybe the culture that we love about our company might be slipping away just a touch, and there's nothing broken. We just want to make sure that we reinforce that culture. And he said, so how would you feel about managing this project and figuring out how we redeploy that to our employees to keep them excited and remind them why they love to work at Michelin? So that's how we started with it, and there was a team that got assigned to work with me, and we came up with a recommendation to our steering committee that included doing leadership training, because as you know, managers are usually the #1 reason a person leaves a company.
Yes.
And so we knew that we needed to start with our leaders and make sure that people weren't having that manager excuse as a reason to leave. And then we wanted to follow that up with sessions for all employees that we call inspiration sessions to just remind them why they love this company, why they came to work at Michelin. And then we put some things in place to sustain it over time and keep it fresh and recurrent without us having to resource it constantly. And so that's how it came to be.
Fascinating. How long did it take you to come up with that recommendation, and what did that process look like?
It was probably about 6 months. So our purpose is we care about giving people a better way forward, and a better way forward involves different things for every employee. And so I rapidly realized, gosh, we can't tell them the answer. They're going to have to tell us the answer of what that looks like. And we knew that leadership was one of the big pieces. And so I worked with an external consulting partner, Schall Consulting Group in Atlanta, because this was so far out of my wheelhouse and my level of comfort, really. I mean, as a statistician, I'm good with KPIs and action plans, but talking about empathy and purpose in life was a bit of a challenge for me personally. So I needed a partner, and so that's where we started. We piloted in our headquarters and 2 different plants, our most engaged plant and our least engaged plant, and the feedback was very positive. So we rolled it out as fast as we could everywhere.
And how did you, in working with this partnership, did you view a lot of different ways that leadership was being taught? How did you go through the process of really kind of ferreting through all of this?
So the consulting company we worked with works with a lot of different coaching companies, a lot of leadership companies, and a lot of corporations that have implemented things. And basically, the contact we worked with was Shannon Schultz, the owner, and she came to us and said, okay, let me recommend some tools. And then as we piloted it, we said, okay, we're definitely going to keep this one. It worked really well. And some of the others we threw out. And so we tweaked the process over about 6 to 8 months, really. Even into rollout, we were still tweaking some of the initial ones.
Wonderful. Tell me what happens at an inspiration meeting.
An inspiration session is 2 hours where we invite all of our employees at a particular site or on a particular group, a business unit, and we remind them why they love to work at Michelin. We ask them to just talk about the stories of the things that make Michelin meaningful and connect them to the things they care about in life and where that fits in at Michelin. So a lot of times people would say, oh, I really like to do community service. And so that would be an area where we talk about all the community service that Michelin does. Or they talk about how much they love to innovate. And we would talk about some of the innovation work that we do. So we made it applicable and relevant for every employee with the idea that they just leave there feeling really excited, really motivated, and it worked.
It's amazing to see what the transformation here. I know that early on, Michelin hired a lot of people out of the academies, the military academies, to be their leaders. And this is such a different style, a different way of leading. Can you talk a little bit about how that transformation has occurred?
I will tell you a story. So part of our steering committee, Pete Selleck, was our former CEO, was the head of the steering committee for this project. And he's former military, and when we got to the recommendation stage before we piloted, he said, in a million years, I would have never come up with this idea on my own or thought that this would be a good idea. And he said, but let's try it and see what happens. And so what I think was a huge lesson for me in that is just always remember to stay open, and other people's ideas actually can be brilliant, even if you think they're a disaster waiting to happen. So I appreciated that leadership style, and the rest of the steering committee as well was really, okay, let's try it and let's see if it works, and if it doesn't, then we'll come up with plan B.
Sure. Tell me this, how did you find out about the Forbes win? How were you contacted? How did you know that you had received the #1 position?
So they contacted us, specifically Dave Stafford, who's the head of HR for Michelin, and we had gotten an announcement from them that we knew we had placed well, but we didn't really know where, and we thought maybe top 25. And so we were really shocked when they called and said, no, actually, you won first place. So we it took us by a huge surprise and is amazing. And Michelin has done a lot of different changes across the past couple of years that all played a role in that. Purpose was just one of those things.
Sure. How have employees responded to that? #1 best place by Forbes. I mean, it's huge. What kind of comments or feedback have you received?
A lot of surprise, a lot of, wow, I didn't know that. A lot of people who work at Michelin have been there for a really long time. We have a tendency, people come with the anticipation of spending 2 or 3 years at Michelin, and then the next thing you know, you've been there for 30 years. I'm one of those people. I thought I spent a year here, and now I've been at Michelin for 13 years. So a lot of our folks who have been there for a really long time have never worked anyplace else, and they don't always have a point of comparison, which is why I think there was a surprise for some. And then lots of people who have worked other places went, oh yeah, I totally am not surprised we got this because of working other places. We know how much better it is.
Sure. I'm curious, as a researcher, do you collect any of the stories? You do?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
So in the purpose work that we did, we actually created video segments of people telling their story of what was their better way forward and what purpose means to them. And then we also do engagement surveys and pulse surveys, a big census annually, and monthly pulse surveys where we collect feedback from employees as well.
Excellent. So there was a bit of risk, I guess, in what you did, especially with your comment. This is very creative, kind of an innovative type project that you were doing, but certainly risk. And that's what you were referencing earlier when you talked with Pete Selleck.
Yeah. To start into something that your whole steering committee doesn't think is going to work is tremendously risky. And I didn't have any better ideas. The team didn't have better ideas at that time. So we thought, we had tried some things before that, some workshops and some email advertising campaigns, and they weren't moving the needle. So we said, it's time to try something really outside the box. And so we did. Probably the dumbest and biggest risk that we took was when we piloted one of the pilots. Pete Selleck wanted his team to go through it. And to teach somebody who's been, in his position, CEO of the company, and has the best leaders in the company reporting into him, leadership training was kind of a stupid idea for us. And so I don't think anybody in that group learned a single thing. But it was probably maybe just a reminder for them of, optimal behaviors and
Sure.
nothing new for them. So I would not recommend starting with the CEO when you're pilot leadership training.
I'm just curious to know, do you consider yourself to be a growth organization or a fixed organization? Those two terms, do they come up in conversation at Michelin? Because it does seem like you've made quite a shift here from just directing and so forth, but now more maybe coaching and getting ideas from your people, even around what's meaningful for them at work.
Yeah.
So
I don't think that those terms are used broadly at Michelin. I do think that we have changed who we are as a company to some extent. So if you look at the tire industry, it isn't growing by leaps and bounds every year. And so we've gotten into different sources of mobility through acquisitions and innovations. And we're recognizing as a company that the world is really uncertain and it's moving and changing fast. And if we don't change with it, that we will be left behind. And so we're constantly looking at how do we improve, how do we be cutting edge in as many places as we can.
Sure. So there, I'm curious, what do you feel like in all of what's happened with you, your career in the R&D, and then kind of getting tapped to come in and do something that's really different for you? What do you feel most proud about? Is there something you would point to, or just what was most gratifying for you?
So the purpose work is certainly the most gratifying role I've ever been in. And when we did the leadership training, we would work with intact teams. And to go into a group of people where they were often skeptical, their boss had signed them up for some training that they really didn't want to take, asking them to really sit there and expose themselves and be vulnerable in these trainings. For many of them, they were terrified. And so we made the process feel not so scary. So I'll give you an example. If I ask you to sit around and talk about emotions, it's going to be a scary thing for most, especially engineers, statisticians, chemists, all of that. And so instead of talking about emotions, we talked about the weather. And we would say, hey, what kind of weather do we want to have in our conversation? Should it be nice and sunny, breezy conversation, or do we need some storm clouds in our conversation? And so we would have them think about it in ways that were more comfortable to talk about, and with the idea of just being really intentional in what they were doing. And so it was really amazingly gratifying to sit and watch groups of people who would come in and be absolutely skeptical, and in the end they would say things like, this changed my life.
Wow.
We had one gentleman that really, probably two that stuck out the most for me in the process of over 3 years doing this. One of them told me at the end, he said, I went through a divorce in the past year, and he said, and if I'd had these tools a year ago, I probably wouldn't have ended up divorced. And he goes, and my wife got custody of our children. He goes, I feel like I'd have a better relationship with my kids, and I might not be divorced if I'd had these tools sooner.
That's amazing.
And that really stuck out.
Sure.
Another gentleman who stuck out a lot was a leader pretty high up in the company, and when we started, he said, I don't want any of your touchy-feely crap. I said, okay. And so we had agreed he would just do what he was comfortable with. And about halfway through the process, it was a 90-day leadership training. About halfway through, he came to me and he said, 4 people have asked me if I have cancer or some terrible disease because I'm acting so different. And I said, oh my gosh, what do you tell them? He goes, no, I'm just trying to be nice. And at the end of the training, he came up to me, gave me a huge hug, and said, this has changed my life.
Wow.
But more importantly, his team said he's the best leader we've ever had.
It doesn't get any better than that.
It doesn't. I mean, it was just amazing to get to be allowed to experience other people's stories with them and go through that journey with them was really an honor and just amazing to go through.
Yes. And how are you tracking that? Are you keeping, do people do evaluations at the end of the segments, and then you also keep maybe some anecdotal stories? Because as a researcher, I know you're looking at that.
Yeah, we did both of those actually. So we asked after each major stage that folks went through, we had them fill out a survey about how they were doing, how we were doing, how the process worked for them, what do we need to change, and so we could continue to tweak it as we went through with different teams. We also collected the stories that they had, and for people who were willing to be on video and tell us their story, we've got a whole library of those out there that are pretty amazing. Website is set up if you ever want to see any of the videos, and it's www.sharepurpose.org.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. That will be really nice for people to maybe go on and look at.
Yeah.
So, introducing a new idea into an organization, huge risk. You did it, and now you have a lot of data that says it's been very successful. You've had this award given to you, which is just the top of the top. And then, I guess what I would be curious to know is what percentage of employees have actually engaged? Is it a volunteer?
It's a volunteer program, and we did it predominantly in North America. And in North America, we reached about 70% of our employees. And it's been kind of a fascinating process. At first, it was really, really slow, and then word of mouth got out about it, and then we had more demand than we could handle for a little while.
Sure.
And then we finally got to the end of the groups that either had been in transition, and so they came into a group that had already gone through it, and so we missed people that way. And there were a couple of groups that just were holdouts and said, yeah, I don't know that I need this.
And if you were to actually with your employees, as you a huge success is really when a whole team really starts to, this becomes part of their culture, and I'm hearing that some of that is definitely happening.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got lots and lots of examples. In fact, one of the best practices we learned through this is the more that a team can tie it to their strategy that they work with, the more it's likely to be sustainable. An example of that is we've got a couple of sites that do production challenges. And there'll be times where we need to just produce a whole bunch more tires than we normally would need to in a very short amount of time. And so a lot of those teams have said, hey, if we can meet this challenge, then we'll do some sort of purposeful reward as a result of it. And so in some cases, they have done where they go to homeless shelters and feed the homeless and they pick where they want to go and what they're going to serve them that day. And the team will make up the meals and serve. We have one team that they will vote as a team. The whole site will vote on where they want to donate money within their community. And it's a really cool thing when we go there. I hear employees saying, hey, my daughter's school just got new computers because of the money Michelin donated.
Wow.
Or my mom's nursing home got better care because of the money Michelin donated. So it's really personal for these teams as they go through that.
I'm definitely
cool.
hearing that. I'm definitely hearing that. Would you mind to talk just a moment about energy leadership? Because I know that was part of what people were introduced to is really managing, their energy and how they present.
It was a big portion of the leadership training that we went through. I personally, along with all the facilitators, we went back to school and got coaching certificates from a company called IPEC. And IPEC owns and invented energy leadership. And so they definitely need to get the credit for this. But we were trained as facilitators on this. And it basically talks about the energy levels that a person brings with them throughout the day, or sort of your weather that you might bring with you throughout the day. And we have it, even if we don't pay attention to it, it's there and others experience us that way. And so we just talked about IPEC's framework of how to organize energy levels. And essentially, it takes all the behaviors that you see that exist in the world and puts them into an organizational structure that you can talk about really objectively as a framework. So instead of me saying, gosh, I think, you seem really mad today about something or angry or frustrated, we can talk about level 2 and say, hey, I think there's some level 2 energy happening. What's going on?
Yeah.
And it's a way to take a lot of emotion and just put it into a nice objective framework.
A framework and make people feel safe talking about it without
exactly.
a new language for them really to use.
In fact, we had one site that put a little box on the floor of their conference room with some footsteps in it, and it, if anybody got called out at being an energy level 2 in the meeting, they had to go stand in the box and they were required to vent for 20 seconds maximum. And of course they would start laughing just like you did, and usually that negative energy level was gone within seconds, and it was a way for them to call each other out and use it to bond as a team and laugh over something rather than get more angry.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how we're teaching, we're treating the world of work now, we have to address more on a more human level. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about emotions. We're talking about things that we really didn't talk about in the past. Why do you think that's so?
I'm sure there are a lot of people who have studied that are way smarter than me. My personal hypothesis is that in this era of work smarter, not harder, and do more with less, most of us are out of tools in our toolbox to do more with less. I haven't got much smarter left in me. And so if we return to the things that we initially learned in life, and I see my kids' schools teaching these same things,
Yeah.
it becomes a new lever for us to stay engaged, stay motivated by connecting with people. And it's something we all know how to do. We just forget about it sometimes when we get busy.
And especially with technology, sometimes gets in the way of connecting
Yeah.
with others. So
Yeah.
it sounds like you're giving your people really good tools and helping them understand how to interface and understand more about themselves as they do.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm curious to that point. I just want to talk a little bit more about you. Do you consider yourself to be a disruptor? I mean, we're here at the entrepreneurial center here at Clemson, and we teach our students how to innovate at work and also how to create new businesses. But disruptor is really someone who comes along and changes.
I probably would have said no to that if you'd asked me before the purpose work. But in that process, I was feeling like I needed to really sit down and figure out what my purpose was. And so, yeah, I really tried to say, how can I make sure that I can improve the experience that employees go through at Michelin and make it a great place to work, make it a place that everybody wants to come to, that we're fighting over resumes of who wants to get in. And so I think my own perception of myself has changed a little bit in this process of it's not as hard to make a huge difference as I used to think it is.
And that's a great thought. I mean, just for all of us to hear and be inspired about. And as you're talking about yourself and kind of how you've gone through this program and how you've rolled this out, tell me something that you kind of like about yourself and you feel like is really one of your strengths, and then maybe an area where you struggle a little bit. I'm just curious.
The easier question to answer is, where do I struggle? There are lots of places. The biggest one, I think, is really for me reaching out and asking for help when I get overloaded or if I need new ideas. As an introvert, it's really easy for me to go onto my little island of aloneness to re-energize. So that thing I constantly have to remind myself is to reach out to others and to gather more opinions, more ideas, because that makes everything smarter and better.
Sure.
So that's probably the part that is the hardest for me. I think that probably the biggest strength that I've discovered in myself over the years is I'm not afraid to break a few rules or say that, question, why do we have that rule? Why are we doing things this way? Why don't we do something differently? If everybody's unhappy with this thing, let's change it.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are too few people in the world that are really going, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. Let's go try something different.
Yeah, I think Brene Brown calls that brave. Would you say that maybe that is what it has to be sometimes? You have to be brave to do it?
You have to be, and it doesn't feel like it in the moment. It feels kind of painful, actually.
Yeah.
I think Brene talks about that, too, that when you're in the midst of doing something courageous, it usually feels really just scary.
Yeah. And I'm curious, in terms of your childhood, was there a challenge that you overcame? Was there something, in your past that really maybe uniquely prepared you for speaking up, being brave, or helped you?
So I grew up in the Midwest, in the middle of nowhere, on a farm kind of community, not very many families there, and had a fantastic childhood. There was no obstacles. There was nothing bad almost ever. I mean, everybody I knew lived. I mean, nothing bad happened. It was a little Mayberry-esque in that sense. And I think the obstacle that I finally realized in life, because people have asked me that a lot, and I'm not sure why, when nothing bad happens, it doesn't prepare you for how to deal with when bad things do happen. And so my mom actually had an accident when I was in my 20s, and she suffered brain damage. And there was no way I could prepare for that. And maybe you can't, even if you've gone through hard things. I don't know.
Sure.
But nothing really that I would say was a defining moment.
Right.
Probably lack of defining moments is kind of where I ended up.
So tell me, what are you curious about now? What are you looking at now?
So many curiosities. So I currently manage the engagement survey and results and employee experience for Michelin for North America. And there's so many opportunities to make the experience better, and so we're looking at lots and lots of them now. And this is a new thing for Michelin, that we're having a real focused approach on the experience that employees go through. We've looked for many, many years at the customer experience, and so now we're turning an eye inward and saying our employees need to have an engaged, inspired, motivated, or at least have well-being in their life for them to be able to service customers well.
Sure.
And so it's really, really fun, and I'm curious where it's going to take us. We don't know yet.
Yeah,
We're just doing the
interesting.
background work on it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love that you flipped it and you're doing the looking inside now.
Yeah.
So going forward, what do you hope to accomplish as you think about the rest of your career? I just wonder if there's personally or professionally something that you're dying to do or wanting to do. Maybe it's a bucket list thing.
No, not necessarily. I really like to be able to make a difference, and that's kind of my purpose. And so it's not big things, and I've come to realize that big things, to innovate around something world-changing or company-changing, is really, really hard. But you can do lots and lots of little tiny things that add up to something huge. And so for me, it's really about, the next several years really saying, what are all the little things we can change that would have a big impact altogether on employees?
Okay, beautifully said. Best advice you ever received?
My son, when he was about 4, I picked him up from preschool, had him strapped into the back seat, and I think I must have been proceeding to whine about something that was not good in my day to my little 4-year-old. And he looks at me and he says, "Mommy, aren't you the boss? Can't you just make it fun?" I went, yeah. And it doesn't matter if you're the boss or not. We all have the ability to make our roles at work, our lives fun, if we want them to be.
That's amazing. That is great advice.
Yeah, he's continued to be my best advice giver in life.
Tell me, is there any question that I should have asked you but didn't?
Nothing's jumping out a lot. I think one of the things that, it kind of goes back to something you asked already, that I'm curious about is how Michelin will evolve with partnering with folks in the community. So love getting to work with Clemson and the Clemson program, and I think there's a way for us to harness more knowledge if we can be more closely connected to different companies in the community and schools in the company. So I'm curious about where we're going to go with that, and think that's another opportunity area for us.
Excellent. Leslie, thank you so much. It's just been a pleasure sitting down with you and getting to know you better.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's been fun.
Sure.
I like it.
Let's make it fun.
Yes.